The following program, The Russ Belville Show, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate to the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity and encourage all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers on The Russ Belville Show are their own, and The Russ Belville Show cannot be held legally responsible for their validity or reliability. Viewer discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think that we think it can criminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Yeah, I hear you had a question for me.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
We love it.
All right, good day, tokers and tokettes, and welcome to the show. It is Monday, December 2nd, 2013, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Hope you guys had a great 4-day weekend. It was a good weekend for me as well. I got a lot of time to sit back and relax and enjoy just some time off away from the internet. So that was good for me. I hope it was good for you. But coming up next, we've got more live shows all this week. In fact, a special week, next 2 weeks, as a matter of fact, of live shows. Today and tomorrow we'll be live here from Rolla J. On Wednesday, we will be live from Phoenix, Arizona. I've got a 10-hour layover on my way to Key West, Florida, where we'll be bringing you shows on Thursday and Friday as I cover the normal Key West legal seminar there in Key West. And then the following week, I'm going to stay in Miami for a week. So we'll have some live shows from Miami. Maybe we'll get some live interviews with Black Tuna or some other of those Florida friends down there. So we'll check that out, but stick with us for the rest of this month. We've got some great shows coming for you. All right, on today's show, it's Monday, so that means it's time for our Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. We'll be taking your live calls at 971-533-7111 or via our chat room on Ustream. If you want to ask a live question of cannabis science, history, culture, or health, Dr. Mitch will probably have an answer for you. So check that out coming up at 5:30. Then at 45 past, we're going to take a look at legalization and how that means actually enforcing laws. As we are producing some laws and rules in Washington and Colorado, some people that are commenting on them are quite astounded by the fact that there will be laws to enforce and cops will have to enforce those laws. We'll take a look at that in the Radical Rant when we get to 45 past the hour today. Also, we've got our daily Toker Tunes. It's Roots Monday, and it doesn't get much more roots than today's tune. We're going to give you a Christmas song covered by Joey Ramone. Bacon Dan will be calling in to tell us all about it, but you can expect some Christmas music now that we're into December. We'll have to pull out some of those old Chief Greenbud tunes as well. But we all begin all of this with our 420 radio news. In the news today, we've got legalization push in Massachusetts, medical marijuana push in Iowa and Minnesota. We've got the story in Washington about underage pot stings, and in Connecticut, a new method of testing for marijuana contamination. Plus, we'll go behind the headlines and take a look at a leaked UN document on international discord over United States prohibitionary policies. It's the Russ Belville Show. Stick around.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa. Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at www.omarfigueroa.com. Cannabis Outreach Collective is an alternative health and wellness option located in Gladstone, Oregon, that serves patients in the Portland area and beyond. We are a full-service alternative health and wellness collective accommodating patients with natural, organic, holistic, and homeopathic remedies, nutritional guidance, advice, education, and medical cannabis, fully in accordance with Oregon OMMP law. You can find out more about Cannabis Outreach Collective on Facebook at COC503 or by emailing cannabisoutreachcollective503@gmail.com or by telephone at 503-853-1319. Check out our menu on Weed Maps and visit Cannabis Outreach Collective today.
This is your 420 Radio News for Monday, December 2nd, 2013. I'm Russ Belville. Massachusetts activists push to fully legalize marijuana, from Boston.com. Pro-marijuana activists in Massachusetts have already succeeded in paving the way for dozens of medical marijuana dispensaries and decriminalizing possession of small amounts of the drug. Now, many of those same activists have their sights set on full legalization of marijuana for adults, effectively putting the drug on par with alcohol and cigarettes. The group Bay State Repeal says it's planning to put the proposal on the state's 2016 ballot. The group is first planning to test different versions of the measure by placing non-binding referendum questions on next year's ballot in about a dozen state representative districts. Bill Downing, a member of Bay State Repeal, said that the state should legalize marijuana for many reasons, especially since the use of marijuana no longer carries the stigma it once did, and many people smoke the drug despite laws against it. Iowa lawmakers still seeking medical marijuana law, from GlobeGazette.com. Legalizing medical marijuana will again be debated in the upcoming legislative session, though Iowa lawmakers have so far been loath to embrace a policy that is spreading in much of the country. Democratic Senator Joe Balcom of Iowa City said he will pursue legislation seeking to legalize medical marijuana in 2014. Balcom said he plans to offer two bills in the next session, one that would reclassify marijuana as a drug with medical benefits, and one that would create a medical marijuana program modeled on the system in New Mexico. A 2010 poll conducted for the Des Moines Register found that 64% of Iowa residents favored legalizing medical marijuana. James Backstrom opposes medical marijuana use, from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Expecting some state legislators to try again next year to legalize marijuana for medical uses, Dakota County Attorney James Backstrom has reaffirmed his position against it. Quote, "The simple fact of the matter is that marijuana is not a medicine," Backstrom said. "Rather, it is an addictive drug that is the most widely abused controlled substance in our state and nation. In every state where legislation of this nature has been adopted, serious problems have occurred. It would be a serious mistake for Minnesota to not learn from these problems and adopt legislation allowing marijuana to be used for medical purposes." End quote. Legislators approved the legalization of medical marijuana in 2009, and it was vetoed by then-Governor Tim Pawlenty. At the legislative session last year, about 40 legislators in both parties, including more than a dozen committee chairmen, worked to add Minnesota to the list of 18 states where it can be prescribed for medical purposes. Proposed legislation would allow doctors to prescribe up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana for patients suffering from debilitating medical conditions. Mark Dayton, the current governor, has opposed medical marijuana because law enforcement officials oppose it. If it were passed again, he would be in a position to veto the legislation. Underage enforcers will try to sting new pot stores, from the Seattle Times. A select group of minors will go into Washington's new legal pot stores on a covert mission to try and buy weed for the state. To curtail youth access to legal marijuana, state officials want to use minors in pot-buying stings next year when stores are expected to open. Stings appear to be warranted in alcohol enforcement. Data for the past 17 months show that alcohol retailers had an 85% compliance rate in youth stings. In other words, for every 7 times minors working for the state tried to buy alcohol in stores, bars, or restaurants, they succeeded once. The state now hires 18, 19, and 20-year-olds across the state to use in alcohol stings. About 30 minors, both men and women, work for the liquor board. They get paid about $10 an hour. When asked for IDs, the minors would provide their real IDs. In Washington, those under 21 have driver's licenses with a vertical design, unlike licenses for adults, which have a horizontal layout. The penalty for a first offense is a 10-day suspension of a store's license or a $2,500 fine. A second violation in a 3-year window would lead to a 30-day license suspension. A third violation in 3 years would cost a business its license. The clerk also could be charged with a felony, as it remains a crime to furnish minors with any kind of pot in Washington. New process detects contaminants in marijuana from CBS Local Denver. The microscope at the University of New Haven, set at 10 times magnification, shows a marijuana leaf covered with dozens of tiny bumps. It's mold, and someone somewhere could be smoking similarly contaminated pot and not have a clue. Heather Miller Coyle, a forensic botanist and associate professor at the university, and her students earlier this year began developing a new process to detect contaminants in marijuana through DNA profiling and analysis. A number of labs across the country are testing marijuana for contaminants using different methods. One study released earlier this year found that pesticide residues on cannabis are transferred to inhaled marijuana smoke, possibly posing a significant toxicological threat. End quote. This has been your 420 Radio News for Monday, December 2nd, 2013. I'm Russ Belville. When we come back, we go behind the headlines to look at a leaked document from the United Nations showing how Latin America and Europe are pushing back against prohibition. You're listening to The Russ Belville Show on 420radio.org. We'll be right back.
Starting up a medical cannabis business, you don't just want any attorney. You want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Lauren Vasquez knows the details of California marijuana law from both a personal and professional angle. Lauren Vasquez rose from the ranks of college normal activists to become one of the Bay Area's best marijuana lawyers. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email firedupLawyer@gmail.com. The number again is 855-MMJ-LAWS, 855-665-5297 for your fired-up lawyer, Lauren Vasquez. Lauren Vasquez is an activist attorney you can trust. Call today.
Let 'em bring in the beat.
Adam Hand of Handmade Apparel produces quality custom designs for t-shirts, hats, and other apparel. Handmade Apparel is the official design shop for 420 Radio, The Russ Belville Show, Ganja John, and Cascadia Concentrates, among many clients who rely on Adam Hand for everything from short-run custom projects to full-run clothing lines. Adam's meticulous designs are individually crafted and screened in vibrant, high-definition color. Visit handmadeapparel.biz to browse the selection of handmade gear or to get a personal quote for your own designs. Handmade Apparel, a proud supporter of 420radio.org.
Let 'em bring in the beat.
420radio.org presents Cannabis Common Sense with Paul Stanford and Casper Leach from Portland, Oregon, one of Cable Access's longest-running marijuana legalization talk shows. Premiering every Friday at noon with replays Sunday at 6 p.m. and Monday at 5 a.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific Time right here on 420radio.org.
Welcome back, everyone. Time for us to go behind the headlines. And today we're looking at how Latin America and Europe are pushing the United Nations to end the war on drugs. A leaked draft of the United Nations' latest long-term strategy document for combating illegal drugs shows that countries from Latin America and Europe want to end the war on drugs model and transition to a public health model focused on decriminalization and looking beyond prohibition. This leaked document provides new insight into the international community's growing revolt over the exclusively prohibitionist policies set by the United States. This draft document, which would normally be kept hidden until all disagreements have been worked out for the final copy, provides the discussion for the UN's scheduled 2014 high-level statement on drug policy, which itself would form the basis of the UN's 2016 General Assembly review that would set international drug policy for the following decade. This leaked draft shows major disagreement with U.S. drug policy and follows up on the Organization of American States calling for market solutions to hemispheric drug policies, especially concerning cannabis. In Latin America, Colombia, Mexico, and Guatemala have expressed that total drug prohibition keeps the dangerous drug cartels in power. Ecuador directly asks the UN to end prohibition, asking for, quote, more effective results in addressing the world drug problem, end quote, and, quote, deliberations on different approaches that could be more efficient and effective, end quote. Venezuela wants the UN to examine, quote, the economic implications of the law enforcement approach in tackling the world drug problem, end quote. In Europe, Switzerland wants the UN to note that decades of prohibition have meant, quote, drug consumption prevalence has not been reduced significantly, and that the consumption of new psychoactive substances has increased in most regions of the world, end quote. Norway wants to ask the UN about, quote, decriminalization and a critical assessment of the approach represented by the so-called war on drugs, end quote. And the entire European Union as a bloc tells the UN, quote, drug users should be entitled to access to treatment, essential medicines, care, and related support services, end quote. The drug war facade is beginning to crumble. Since 1961, when the efforts of the first drug czar, Harry J. Anslinger, prompted the UN to create the Single Convention Treaty on Narcotic Drugs, the international policy on drugs has been the U.S. policy on drugs: prohibition, criminalization, and eradication. But now the Latin American countries that suffer prohibition violence and the European countries that suffer drug addiction are ready to begin a new policy that recognizes the realities of drug use and drug markets. This leaked document shows the U.S. to increasingly be the outlier, clinging on to the failed prohibitionist policies of the 20th century as the rest of the world confronts the realities of the 21st. And this is happening not only on the international level, but of course the national level, with Washington and Colorado passing their marijuana legalization laws, and Alaska and Oregon sure to follow in 2014, perhaps California, Massachusetts, Maine, and Rhode Island in 2016. The wall is beginning to crumble, and the United States finds itself on the outside as these other more forward-looking countries begin to recognize the realities of the drug market and the need to end prohibition. We've already seen it begun in Uruguay, where the lower house has already voted to legalize marijuana and marijuana markets. It's expected to pass the Senate, and it's going to be signed by the president. We've also seen a change in Portugal, where since 2001, personal possession of all drugs has been decriminalized and addicts are no longer treated like criminals. In Portugal, we have seen drug use, drug dependence, drug overdoses, crime. All these measures of drug harm have been reduced or not gone up since drug decriminalization has taken place in Portugal. And of course, we've got the 30-year experience of the Netherlands, where since the 70s, marijuana use and small marijuana purchases have been tolerated in the coffee shops. But we still see problems having to do with the continued prohibition of marijuana and other drugs in neighboring countries. In the south, in Maastricht in the Netherlands, they have a lot of problem with French, Belgian, and German tourists coming in for marijuana. That creates a lot of traffic problems and a lot of other associated ills for this small European city. But the problem is not with Maastricht having legalized or tolerated marijuana coffee shops. The problem was with France, Belgium, and Germany not having these legalized coffee shops. As we are finding with Washington and Colorado as well, having decriminalization or legalization in one area means that you're going to have greater problems being reported by the neighboring areas, like in the United States, Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska, all complaining about medical marijuana and legalized marijuana coming from the West. It has to be done all or nothing, folks. We've got to get legalization across the world and across the United States as well. All right, folks, that time, of course, means it is time for us to take a break. So we're going to do so, and we hope you get the opportunity to take yourself a nice herbal relaxation break. When we come back, we'll have Bacon Dan on the line for our Daily Toker Tunes.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would sell you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
I'm a reefer smoking man.
Wood Pipe Smoke Shop and Speakeasy is your source for cannabis community gear in southern Wisconsin. Owners Brian and Tammy Wood are located in Kendall, just outside of Madison, and they've got everything for the smoking enthusiast, including a full assortment of pipes, water pipes, hookahs, bubblers, one-hitters, and so much more. They're open noon to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday and can help you with your detoxification therapies as well. Call 608-466-7473 or email woodpipes@yahoo.com for more information. That's 608-466-7473 or email woodpipes@yahoo.com. And as always, go pack go.
What makes something funny? How does humor impact health and psychological well-being? How can you incorporate humor into everyday life? A concise, reader-friendly introduction to an important but often underappreciated topic in modern psychology, Humor 101 explains the role of comedy, jokes, and wit in the sciences and discusses why they are so important to understand. Psychology professor Dr. Mitch Earlywine draws from his personal experiences in stand-up comedy to focus on how humor can regulate emotion, reduce anxiety, and diffuse tense situations, expose pretensions, build personal relationships, and much more. He irreverently debunks the pseudoscience on the topic of humor and leaves readers not only funnier, but better informed. It's part of the Psych 101 series from Springer Publishing, Humor 101 by Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Ph.D.
Georgia.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Roots Monday, featuring the blues, country, folk, and jazz music that birthed the modern sounds we enjoy today. You can get downloads and more information about all our Daily Toker Tunes by visiting music.radicalruss.com. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tunes.
All right, everybody, welcome back, and we've got Bacon Dan on the phone line. Can you hear me, Dan? Dan, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I had something weird going on my board here, but we got you now. How is everything going?
Oh, things are going very, very good. How are you, Russ?
I'm fantastic, and it's December, and so that means we're, going to start getting into some of the holiday music, and I'm pretty excited that you've got this tune lined up here because I'm a big fan of the Ramones. Why don't you tell us what you got?
All right. Well, this is from Joey Ramone's little EP he put out in 2002. As we all know, unfortunately, Joey lost his battle with cancer a few years ago, and the music world just hasn't been the same without him, and even though I am now known affectionately in my group of friends as Mr. Portland and Mr. PDX due to my massive love of this area, I figured I'd bring a little taste of the East Coast where I grew up. This is just Joey doing what he does and taking a classic, oldies Christmas song and put a little Ramones twist on it, but it's so heartfelt. And when you hear it, it's like man, you know, everybody can attach themselves to this song in some way. There's always been that one love of yours, one way or the other, be it a person, be it a place, be it a thing, you just wish you could be with on the holidays. And this will might bring a tear to your eye, but it'll make you smile. And it's great to go with a nice bowl of Silvertip, which I am just about to enjoy right now.
Yeah, Silvertip from brightsidepdx.com. Great strain. I've got a review of it up at the Weed blog if you want to check that out. Nice heady sativa, don't you think?
Oh, I love it. It is just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, all right. So get some of that on. We've got some Joey Ramone for you with the classic Christmas, Baby Please Come Home. And Bacon Dan, thanks so much for the song.
No problem.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Absolutely.
This is Joey.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGAgenetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAgenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
Ever wonder how often to change your bong water? The most effective method for baking pot brownies? The best destinations for a ganja getaway? How to hide herb in your car? Whether to grow your own? How precisely to legalize it? Or how something as wonderful as marijuana ever got to be illegal in the first place? Finally, you can find all these answers and much more in the official High Times Pot Smoker's Handbook, featuring 420 things to do when you're stoned. Since 1974, High Times magazine has covered marijuana in all its aspects and wonders, from cultivation to legalization to the herb's enduring and exalted place in popular culture. Packed with inside information, the official High Times Pot Smoker's Handbook wove all of this collected wisdom together into a single indispensable ganja guide, including an entertaining look at marijuana's history, profiles of herb-friendly travel destinations and festivals, favorite potluck recipes from the High Times staff, smoking skills, advocacy and activism, essential marijuana movies and songs, profiles of famous cannabis strains, comprehensive growing information, celebrity endorsements, and much more. This is truly, finally, the ultimate guide to green living.
420radio.org presents an original production of Big Daddy Fink's Funky Roller Rink with Big Daddy, the best of 70s funk and disco, right here every Thursday at 8 p.m. Pacific, and 2-hour blocks of replays at 10 p.m. every weekend, Friday and Saturday nights, Pacific time, right here on 420radio.org.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
Welcome back, everyone. 31 after the hour, and it's Monday. That means it's time for our regular dose of cannabis science with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Mitch, how you doing?
Was having a bad day till I heard the Ramones.
That's right. The Ramones will cheer anybody up, man. That's good stuff there. Didn't know you were a Ramones fan, sir.
Oh, indeed. It goes back to the 80s when I saw them in the city.
Oh, you actually got to see the Ramones. How cool is that? All right. Well, here on our Cannabis Science segment, we give everyone a chance to get their questions in our chat room. So while those are building up, we always give Dr. Mitch the first word so he can tell us what's the latest in cannabis science.
Some sad news coming out of a abstract that basically reports that spice, that nasty synthetic marijuana, has created 2 cases of stroke. I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. So if I sound retarded, it's because I'm hearing myself in my own ear.
Let me see if I can fix that, Dr. Mitch. Go ahead, and I'll see if I can kill that reflection there.
Sure. So early last month, we had a publication basically showing 2 reports of basically these healthy siblings who smoked some K2 and then ended up both in the hospital with strokes. I want to emphasize that this is not bad news for cannabis. THC is just a partial agonist for that CB1 receptor, meaning it only gets it to fire at a certain level, whereas the material in spice was specifically designed to make that CB1 receptor fire long and hard. And it's unfortunate to see that these are the indirect effects, essentially, of Prohibition. I'm sure these guys would have rather had a plant with a 5,000-year history of safety than something brand new that actually gave them a cerebrovascular accident.
Yeah, that's terrible to hear. Did that echo go away for you, by the way?
Indeed. Thanks so much. I hope I sound a little more articulate.
Yeah, I know. I've had to deal with that on Skype before, and it's really annoying. This is interesting. You mentioned these strokes from K2 and Spice. Our chatter, Gothic Prophet, is mentioning that stroke victims may actually be benefited by cannabis to help minimize brain damage. Can you tell us about the research in neuroregeneration when it comes to cannabis?
So, I mean, it's not extended to humans in quite the elaborate ways I'd hope, but at least the animal literature suggests that basically there's a chance for the antioxidant properties of both THC and cannabidiol to save neurons and neural tissue in reaction to a stroke if it's administered relatively rapidly after some kind of head injury or something like that. These were ischemic strokes where basically there's a problem with blood flow, not necessarily a crushed neuron or something like that. So it's not clear that it would necessarily generalize to this condition, but we clearly have a lot of wonderful antioxidant potential with not only cannabis, but a whole lot of crazy green leafy plants.
Well, that's really good news to hear. All right, we have a question coming in from our chat room from Electric Bob, who wants to know, what are the correlations between IQ and teenage cannabis use? You know, we've heard that talking point. 1 out of 6 adolescents will be addicted, and it'll cause 8-point loss in IQ. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what's funny is when you take a close look at those data from Freed that had that 8-point loss in IQ, they were talking about the daily users across a long period. There was also a middle group there that they don't often talk about that used cannabis once a week. They had a slight increase in cannabis and IQ over the years, and nobody ever seems to mention that. In adults, we never see any correlation with cannabis use and IQ unless somebody's actually high at the time they're taking the test. So I feel like it's, of course, very good to wait until your brain is fully developed before you start experimenting with the plant. But this overblown notion that everybody who smokes a joint at age 14 is suddenly retarded is really just a whole lot of propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I know it's anecdotal, but I work with so many people who started their cannabis use in their teenage years, you know, some as early as 12 years old. And they seem to be bright, functioning people. I mean, it's not something we'd recommend to do, but do we actually have any cases where we can say, yeah, marijuana really messed that guy up?
It's sad because it becomes unfalsifiable. So every time I point to, you know, anyone I know, from Carl Sagan to just a local undergraduate student, and say this person used cannabis and is fine, everybody says, but look how good they could have been. And I think, well, great, that's completely impossible. How could I ever know how good someone could have been, right? It's completely outrageous. Nevertheless, I mean, I think recommending against cannabis use in adolescence is completely reasonable given the data we have right now. And let's not catastrophize about that, though. I certainly don't think 8 IQ points is enough to send anyone to jail.
Yeah, Dr. Mitch, can you imagine how many gold medals Michael Phelps would have won if he hadn't have smoked pot?
The impossible dream. Yes, indeed.
All right, I wanted to get some stories from the news media that I thought had kind of a scientific angle to them, and I wanted to get your comments on this. The story we told today is the University of New Haven in Connecticut. Heather Miller Coyle is a forensic botanist who's working on these DNA tests on marijuana to detect molds and contaminants and pesticides and such. How much do we know about the harm possible from these contaminants in marijuana?
It's curious because it's clear that long-term exposure to inhaled mold in any case, regardless of its source, can be incredibly detrimental. And certain molds actually can create odd symptoms that mimic some brain damage and things like that. It can really be tragic. However, the actual established cases we have in humans just don't seem to be out there. I don't mean to minimize the problem, and I'm delighted that somebody is doing this work, but I don't want to catastrophize about it. And then the habit of basically decarboxylating cannabis, getting your oven up to 200 degrees, breaking up your cannabis and putting it in on a pan and basically turning the oven off and waiting till it cools down, is not a terrible habit for any of us, and definitely kills a whole lot of molds. But if you can see mold on cannabis, I mean, let's be honest, it's just not worth it. There's so much great cannabis in the world. Why would you smoke some that's already moldy?
Yeah, that's a very good point, especially when we're talking about folks out here on in the West Coast where there's a lot greater access. It's good to see that these scientists are putting this information together and trying to help consumers. Another aspect of this that I found interesting is that the way the New Haven researchers were able to work on DNA testing for pot contaminants is they got a $100,000 grant for a high-intensity drug trafficking area, and this is kind of dovetailing on work they did to make DNA profiles of pot to be able to trace who it came from and which dealer was growing it. So it's one of those interesting cases where scientists are forced to, you know, try to find some harm in marijuana before they're able to try to protect us or find something good about it.
Well, it was curious too because I find that really creative. So basically what you're saying is, hey, I'm gonna develop a way to track cannabis to make sure it's not from an illicit source, but while I'm at it, I'm going to make sure everybody's safe in the same way from these contaminants. I mean, I just think that's delightful and brilliant.
All right, we have another story that got a lot of coverage last week having to do with the Washington State Patrol. The cops out there say that they've gotten far more blood tests now that are positive for THC. They usually get 1,000 a year that are positive for THC. In the first 6 months of 2013, they've gotten 745 that are positive for THC. I was wondering what you think of those results and how sampling might have something to do with this.
This is curious, and I mean, I'm not stunned that some more cannabis smoking is going on in Washington State now, and that let's not be naive about that. But I'm curious not only about how are they sampling these, right? Are people now post-Prohibition essentially more eager to get these blood samples? We have no idea. And in truth, under those circumstances, what are the THC levels we're really getting? So they're saying, oh, people are testing positive for THC, but are we really reaching an impaired level? Was anybody actually showing impaired driving, or was this something that's turning into just kind of a generation of propaganda-related data under those same circumstances? And in truth, I don't think we're going to know until the end of the year, and it may take 2 or 3 years worth of data before we can really say if there's some kind of trend here, because we see these numbers often go up and down depending upon the funding available for these exact tests.
You know, that's a good point. And the spokesperson for Washington State Patrol actually told the media, we won't really know for 2 or 3 years to be sure, but that got buried around paragraph 10, paragraph 11 in most of these stories. So I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that. And also a couple other facts about that. The State Patrol says they're still pulling over about the same number of people for impairment, and the fatality rates in Washington State have gone down. So it doesn't appear that there's more mayhem on the freeways. It appears that they're testing more people for pot.
Well, and what's curious is Roby's data from back in the late 90s suggested that if folks were forced to drive after using cannabis, they often did a number of things to increase their safety. They slowed their speed, they increased the distance between their car and the car in front of them, they increased their stopping distance, and I feel like in many ways that may account for why we're not seeing mayhem, even if we are seeing increases in cannabis use.
So is that a difference in the cannabis user versus the alcohol user? Is that the alcohol user gets impaired both physically and judgment? They believe they're not impaired, whereas a marijuana user might get impaired, but they're aware of their impairment. Is that a true statement?
It may be a bit of an extension, but it's clear that both alcohol intoxication and cannabis use lead to different behaviors behind the wheel. So it may be that the exact same person, after using these things, behaves differently. It's not any personality trait so much as an aspect of what happens with alcohol or with cannabis. We have tons of data from my lab and others showing that secondary reaction time, the kind of things that require your initial intention of driving, and then any secondary thing is clearly going to be impaired with alcohol. We don't have data to suggest that with cannabis. We do see some impaired things in automatic functioning, basically automatic processing with cannabis use, but a lot of things that if it's a controlled process, if it's something that extra focus can improve, you can still do it even at relatively high levels of use.
You know, we saw some research from Anderson and Rees, I believe out of Montana State University, where they looked at medical marijuana states and found that there were lower problems with alcohol in driving in the medical marijuana states, suggesting perhaps a substitution effect between alcohol and marijuana. Do you believe there's a substitution effect between alcohol and marijuana to say that, you know, where marijuana is available, people will drink less? And if so, isn't that harm reduction when we know alcohol is so much more harmful?
We have seen that with that one data set. However, Rosalie Pacula has some data from an economics group at RAND suggesting that there were complements. So I don't know what to make of it when I've got one study showing one thing and one study showing another. But in fact, I'm wondering if this may be a difference of overlap depending upon where the data were gathered. So in I believe that was in Montana, the cannabis users and the alcohol users may be an overlapping crew, whereas in other states it may be these are really disparate populations. They're sort of people who are into alcohol, people who are into cannabis, and they don't overlap the same way, and that may be why we're getting these different results.
All right, we got one last question, but folks, if you wanted to get a question in, didn't get it in, or you're just shy and want to ask it privately, you can always send your questions directly to Dr. Mitch at 420research@gmail.com. Just send an email to 420research@gmail.com, or visit our 420radio.org contact page, and we've got a drop down there for Dr. Mitch. Our last question here has to do with the American Medical Association. Last week, they reaffirmed their opposition to marijuana legalization, saying, quote, "Cannabis is a dangerous drug and as such is a public health concern," end quote. What's it going to take, Dr. Mitch, to get the mainstream medical organizations to understand that prohibition is more harmful than the alternative?
I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but when Big Pharma can't send physicians to the Caribbean for a cruise, suddenly their push against medical cannabis is going to drop.
Yeah, there we go. It's all about the buy-in, and that's just a shame to see it happening that way as far as determining our policies across this country. But
alternatively, if medical cannabis providers could suddenly start sending physicians on cruises, maybe we'd see less resistance. I don't know.
That's what we need. There we go. The Seattle to Alaska cruise, all sorts of ideas there. All right. Well, Dr. Mitch, thanks for joining us again on this Monday edition of Cannabis Q&A. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And stick around, folks. When we come back, we're going to talk about those new laws in Washington, underage stings, and why we have to enforce the law, folks.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Marijuana and alcohol are the two most popular recreational drugs in America. Marijuana smoking is non-toxic, relatively safe, and has a low risk of dependence. Alcohol drinking is potentially fatal, dangerous to society, and is quite addictive. Marijuana is safer, so why are we driving people to drink? That's the question of the new book, Marijuana is Safer, So Why Are We Driving People to Drink? By Paul Armentano, Mason Tvert, and Steve Fox. Visit Amazon.com or ChelseaGreen.com today to order your copy of Marijuana is Safer, or visit...
Hey, Joey, I got some stuff you just gotta try. What is it? Pot. You know, marijuana. Oh, well, I don't know. What, chicken?
Joey's in a jam. What should he do? Cake.
Get a pizza.
Excellent. Get a pizza. Get real.
Get out of there.
You got it. Let's see if Joey's that smart.
I'm not chicken. You're a turkey.
He's right. Drug dealers are dorks. Don't even talk to him. Cowabunga!
The Russ Belville Show. Chat is for friends 18 and older. We expect our chat to be civil, mature, and free from excessive profanity. If you don't like these rules, there are approximately 6 billion other chat rooms with lower standards that you can visit.
You want answers? I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical rant.
Well, for today's rant, I want to talk about an article that I read up on High Times today. It's entitled, Underage Narcs Set to Bust Washington State's Pot Shops. It's a short article, so let me just read it to you. You can get the flavor for it. In an attempt to keep Washington's retail pot outlets from contributing to the delinquency of minors, the state has put a rogue gang of young narcs on the payroll for the sole purpose of conducting sting operations. According to reports, the State Liquor Control Board intends to use an underage snitch department to carry out controlled buys across Washington state's newly legalized recreational marijuana stores, in the same way it currently utilizes these types of hired hammers to supervise the state's retail alcohol sales. Liquor Control Board Enforcement Chief Justin Nordhorn says that it makes sense to use the state's current methodologies for monitoring alcohol sales to also oversee what is happening inside the legal marijuana trade. He says that strict enforcement procedures are absolutely necessary at this time, especially since the Federal Department of Justice will undoubtedly be breathing down the state's neck in 2014, just waiting for a slip-up. The state hopes that by operating its legal marijuana commerce with an element of 1940s German law enforcement, that they may be able to prevent Uncle Sam's wrecking crew from unexpectedly swooping in and carting the entire industry and those who regulate it off to federal prison. Said Nordhorn, quote, "Of course the feds are looking at a tightly regulated market around youth access, and I think this shows we're being responsible," end quote. The liquor board currently employs about 30 men and women between the ages of 18 and 20 years of age that travel across the state conducting sting operations in liquor stores. This rat force typically consists of college students with interests in law enforcement and substance abuse, and they earn roughly $10 an hour to initiate tattletale tactics against those outlets that do not ensure customers are at least 21 years old. Nordhorn says that a similar group of informants will soon be making their way through Washington state's pot stores and immediately reporting to enforcement agents if sale of marijuana is permitted without a valid state ID. The penalty for a first-time offense is a 10-day suspension of the store's license or $2,500 fine. The second could result in a 30-day suspension. The third could cost the business its license altogether. What's more is that this fashion of pseudo-entrapment could have some clerks facing serious criminal charges, as it is a felony offense to provide minors with weed. Here's an idea. Card kids and don't sell them weed. You know, follow the law. This article, with its rogue gangs of young narcs, underage snitch department, an element of 1940s German law enforcement, rat force, tattletale tactics, pseudo-entrapment. Really? We do this for alcohol? And the stats show in Washington state, about 1 out of 7 18 to 20-year-olds attempting to purchase alcohol are illegally served, and that's with stings. How many bars would serve kids alcohol without the threat of a sting? It's not even like the medical marijuana stings. You know, the ones we've reported from California and such, where the cops go get a fake ID and lie about their illness to pseudo-entrap dispensaries. No, it's not that. In Washington, these will be actual 18 to 20-year-olds. Using their actual underage license. And in Washington state, when you get a license, if you're under the age of 21, it's in portrait orientation. You know, up and down, right? Where if you're 21 and over, it's side to side. It's horizontal. It's landscape orientation. So it's not as if a pot shop owner is being fooled by some 28-year-old pretending to be 20. And it's not as if he's getting a fake license to fool him. This is a pot shop owner serving someone under 21 when presented with a portrait license that is real and clearly under 21. You know, breaking the law. Folks, do we want to legalize marijuana? Do we? Do we really want to legalize marijuana? Because if so, that includes laws to follow, like not serving people under 21. How does the state enforce that law without conducting sting operations? Now, look, personally, I'd rather that the legal age was 18. I figure if you're old enough to carry an M16 in the sand, you're old enough to carry a joint in your hand. However, that's not the law. The law is 21 and older, and the feds are just waiting for sordid tales of stoned teenagers wrecking their cars to give them the excuse to shut it all down and to give them the propaganda they need to forestall the next state from legalizing. As far as I'm concerned, congratulations, kudos to the Washington State Liquor Control Board for making sure that the clerks are going to follow the law. You don't want a felony for serving an underage kid? Don't sell to an underage kid. The licenses are clear. The laws are clear. And we want to legalize. For how many years have we attacked marijuana prohibition by saying, well, you know, drug dealers don't check ID? Well, now the pot dealers have to check ID. And these stings are a fair and reasonable way to ensure that they do just that. You know, I'm starting to see, as I read around the net and I read reactions to legalization, from some of the more, extreme elements of the legalization side, I'm seeing people reject laws and reject regulations and reject taxes. We've been saying tax and regulate, tax and regulate, tax and regulate. Oh, but once the tax and regulation passes, we're bitching about the taxes and the regulation. Now, I have some problems with some of the regulations as well. Like I said, I wish the age was 18, not 21. I wish the taxes were lower. I wish people in Washington state were allowed to grow their own. But until they can, there is now a law to follow. And Washington state and Colorado are going to have a microscope on them from not just the national news media, but the world news media on how this very limited, very tenuous step into full market legalization takes place. And we have our side trying to demonize and warn against reasonable, rational, standard law enforcement procedures that have been used for years with alcohol stings. I know, I think that part of the rejection of this and part of the fear of this has to do with a lot of people's sympathy toward the 18 to 20-year-old pot smoker, who, by the way, tend to be the majority of pot smokers. I mean, from age 16 to 22 is where you find your greatest amount of pot smoking people. So I understand the concern. The clerk might get a felony if he sells to someone underage, but part of getting marijuana legalization passed is getting past the fear the general public has of WOTC. What about the children? And if we show ourselves to be unconcerned with teenagers smoking pot, if we show ourselves to be fighting against reasonable regulations to keep pot out of kids' hands, the next few states that try to legalize and try to say things like tax and regulate will be met with people saying, yeah, we heard that in Colorado, and then you guys oppose the taxes. When we say things like, well, drug dealers don't check ID, let's put it in pot stores where they check ID, they'll point back to this article and people in Washington State saying, oh, but you were against checking IDs and making sure that they got checked. We have to be very careful as we tiptoe through these next few years of the nascent marijuana legalization so we don't ruin it for the next few states that are going to try it. And we have this blueprint. We can see how this has happened before. We saw how in California, when they passed medical marijuana in 1996, and they passed as wide open as of medical marijuana as possible, for any condition a doctor believes marijuana will help. And we saw how that proliferated. And we saw how that turned what was supposed to be medical marijuana with doctors and severely injured people and severely disabled people, how that turned into dock-in-the-box tents on Venice Beach and bikini girls with twirling signs. And from that point, once those abuses got so much airplay, the next states to legalize medical marijuana, every single state from that point on had to come up with a stricter, and more stricter marijuana program. Is that the game plan that we're going to follow for marijuana legalization? Are they going to turn and see that, we legalized an ounce in pot stores in Washington and Colorado, and the marijuana community rejected those regulations, and terrible things happened, so the next states that legalize either don't legalize or pass even more restrictive legalization? That's not what I want to see happen. I want to see Washington and Colorado's marijuana legalization be well regulated, have very, very little abuse, bring in lots of tax revenue, and cause little to no problems for society. So that the next couple of states, Oregon and Alaska, that try to legalize, can say, hey, look at Washington and Colorado. Look how good that turned out. Look what great results we got out of Washington and Colorado. Instead of us having to defend Washington and Colorado, I want Washington and Colorado to be our shining examples of how good legalization could turn out, not the warnings about how bad it could turn out for the next states that try to pass it. And this is something that I think the marijuana community is going to have to definitely get their minds around, is that as we legalize, we're not criminals anymore. And the cops aren't necessarily our enemies anymore. At least we can try to make that happen. Maybe not in New Mexico. But the point is, we need to come to a realization that in a post-legalization world, we need to be fighting for the regulations. Now, again, we can have differences with the regulations. We can think the regulations need to be loosened or expanded. That's fine, and we can fight for that through political channels now that we're legal and we're citizens fighting for more rights. But until that happens, we need to show that we are concerned about upholding the law, and we are concerned about making sure that those federal guidelines are followed so that we don't end up with raids and lawsuits and the whole thing being shut down before it has a chance to bloom. And fortunately, the change is starting to happen. When those DEA raids happen in Denver on the medical marijuana dispensaries, usually the reaction of the marijuana community is, oh my God, how dare you bust the growers? How dare you bust the dispensaries? They're helping the patients. Oh dear. But this time the reaction was, if they're bad actors, if they're shipping out of state, they're violating those federal guidelines, good riddance, get rid of them. That's a major sea change in the marijuana community. And I'm hoping we see more of it. As we legalize, we need to push our community to want to follow those laws so that we can get better laws in the future and in more places. That's all the time we got for today. Thanks for joining us. For Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,